evening, good morning, good afternoon, worldwide, and welcome to this final session of the product day 2 for Plateau Elevate. Today's topic for this session is an interesting one, and I think everybody is going to be really interested into our speakers, how to fight project culture into project management. So before going on to this topic, we'll just introduce ourselves, and after that we'll have some prepared questions, and we'll have also 10 minutes at the end. We'll try to make it for 15-20 minutes of a discussion for upvoted questions. So if you've been there since the beginning, you know the tip. Go on the right side panel, go on Q&A, upvote for the question, and at the end I will say them out loud and ask our speaker to give them a pick on that. Okay, so we can just get ready and introduce ourselves. So I guess, Chantal, if you want to go first.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Philippe. So I'm Chantal Botana, and I have about 20 years of experience in product management, working with startups, scale-ups, and Fortune 500 enterprises. And most of my career was spent in New York City, same as where Andrew is right now. But now I'm in the Netherlands, so I've been in Europe for the past 4 years. And so I'm getting to understand the different cultural aspects of product management and companies, etc. So that's a little bit about me. I'll pass it over to Andrew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Tsui, a product management leader with about 12 years of product experience. Had a chance to work with a range of companies spanning B2B SaaS and B2C technology companies. I'm really passionate about this topic and excited about today's session because I work with teams day to day to focus on outcomes and market product fit. And in my new role starting in January 2020 with K-Health, my focus is going to be on new user growth and building up a team to address that problem. It means we're starting fresh and have an opportunity to avoid slipping into some of the delivery traps that can be really tempting, to specifically avoid building a project culture and instead build a product culture from the get-go. So really happy to be here, and Philippe, let's take it away.
Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Andrew. So my name is Philippe, and I'm the product manager for now 4 to 5 years. I'm based in Paris, France, and I work for a company called Artspur, which is a marketplace for contemporary artworks. I'm really interested into product management culture, and I've been digging into that, exchanging with peers, and trying to get knowledge on my own. And I'm really happy to moderate this talk today. Okay, so introduction is done, and I think we can just dive into it. And I guess the first question I can ask to Andrew and Chantal is, maybe we can start with the main difference that some people know, maybe sometimes we have to reprecise between project management and product management.
I can take that one to start. Sure. I think the main difference is that a project is more about time, scope, and budget. So there's a beginning and an end, whereas product, it's all about viability, desirability, feasibility, and of course, value. What value can you deliver to your customers? And it really has a life of its own. There's no clear end date. You kind of, it's a living, breathing product. So that for me are the two major differences in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I think to add upon that, Chantal, I really like the phrase that my old boss put it on, which is one is output focused and the other is outcome oriented. And certainly in this case, product management is all about the outcome and identifying market product fit, whether you've found the problem or a job that users and customers will be paying for. Whereas project management, in some ways, one can think of it as, hey, you do rapid cycles, rapid runs of the project in order to get to market so that you can see whether or not that's resonating with users, with customers, and overall.
Sounds great as an introduction. I actually really agree with what you say, and maybe what I can add is the main difference that I see between the two is also the fact that in product management we have a high level of uncertainty that we accept, and it's part of our job, that we don't accept so much into project culture management. It's really, you have to know the deadlines, you have to know where you go, the kinds of resources. So, yep. and it's actually there's a lot of misconception between the two. And why do you think there are actually so many misconceptions between project and product management? Wants to go first on this one?
Oh, sure. I can go. I mean, I think part of it is just, there's this desire to know when something's going to deliver and what it's going to be, right? I think it's actually just human nature, right? So it's hard to shake that a little bit. I was listening to Matt LeMay earlier, and I would totally agree that with his statement about autonomous teams and why they're potentially at risk these days is because it's hard to hand over the reins for everybody else, for your product managers, and say, okay, we'll let you just build whatever you want. The thing is that that's irresponsible as well. You actually need to provide quite a lot of context and the why. So what's the vision and the mission and the strategy in order to properly hand over the reins and say, okay, I think I've given you all the context that you need, and now it's up to you guys to figure out exactly how you're going to solve for that. And try a whole bunch of things, right? It has to be a culture of experimentation. That's just not always so easy. It takes some time.
Yeah, and I think from one very specific lens, I was thinking about this idea of the misconceptions as the sense that product managers tend to have a strong project management nose. They've got to get things done
Absolutely.
in a highly matrixed organization, right? So they're the ones who are sometimes by sheer force of will, just getting people in together and just making things happen. And that can be really easily mislabeled. The rush of getting something out the door, it's really easy to confuse the output for the outcome.
Yeah, especially I think that we tend to, from let's say habits, to see value by getting things done. So we have this tendency to get from the product manager culture that when things gets done, when things get forward, that actually adds value. And this is maybe one of the things that actually pushes sometimes to get to this project management culture, whereas product management is actually asking themselves, why is value? Why do we deliver this? And why are we building this? And this is also something that even when I work on a project, I try to, shake my hand and say, okay, am I going into the right value? It is something that we want to add. So yeah, that I guess that's something that we all know.
I think, sorry, just to add on to that, Philippe, I think it's important along the way then for everybody to share the results of their experiments, right? Because the worst thing is to be kept in the dark, right? Nobody likes to be kept in the dark. So if you are experimenting and you're doing discovery, whether it's a discovery of opportunities or discovery on the actual solution because you've already done your earlier discovery, you got to share those findings along the way so that people can, so that your executives and the rest of the company can actually champion what you're doing as opposed to, becoming blockers.
100% agree.
I totally follow you on that, and it's also one of the things that we wanted to talk about in the upcoming question is about how you can dive into this product culture based on the product management one, adding step by step, and having this baby steps to baby steps, and add this value focus on. And we had this discussion in the prep talk talking about what are the tips or what are the way for as a product manager or as a product leader, as a very experienced product manager, to recognize this way that the company you're talking to or the product people you're talking to are actually based on a project management culture. Can you give us some tips about that?
Yeah, so if I could jump in here with maybe a few kind of prompts, I tend to think of it as especially with, say, B2B SaaS companies, can you, for example, count how many promises to specific customers are outstanding on your backlog? That's a big tell. Maybe if your company runs OKRs on a quarterly basis, do the OKRs look more like milestones and dependencies that chain together? Do they look a little bit like large tasks that constantly overflow, as opposed to different experiments that sometimes fail, that also roll up into a theme or a hypothesis about the problem you believe your organization can solve. The last prompt I like to think about is, do you think that your organization is hesitant to pivot or abandon work if you're seeing weak signals about uptake, about the outcomes?
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that, I think another telltale sign is when you have a roadmap with features on a timeline. That's a dead giveaway. And what you really want is something that Andrew mentioned: is you want themes and opportunities and the outcomes that you're going for. I think always keeping in mind the why. You got to tell better stories in order to get away from that build trap. You have to be able to explain the vision and the mission and the strategy, and then leave those details. I think when you have features on a timeline, you're really talking about a particular team's delivery plan, and that should be internal for that team only, and they should be able to throw things away, right?
Definitely. And this is something that actually connect to what I wanted to add is also sometimes when I talk to people regarding project versus product management is about are you willing to fail, or are you accepting the way that you have uncertainty facing you, and what happens if you deliver something that doesn't work? What's gonna be your reaction? And sometimes you can see how people react, or what do they say to you, face that they do not accept it sometimes, or they actually, it's not that they do not accept it, but they understand that you made a mistake or something has been wrong, which is actually going very, 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 very much close to the project management culture. In a project management culture, you would by the book. I'm not a scientist or anything about project management, but they would say, okay, great, that's an opportunity. We learned a lot about that. We learned that it failed, we learn fast, and we can iterate and deliver something new and something brand new. And sometimes, these little details you can see and the question you can ask can tell a lot about the culture and about how people deliver and how people look for problems.
Yeah, listen, I think that every once in a while a project is going to slip in, and that's okay. But I think you need to call a spade, right? I've worked at a couple of companies where they've gotten really good at being able to pinpoint when they're trying to sneak something in and back it up into an OKR, and that just doesn't work. So if you know that it is a project and it does have time, scope, at least two of those, time, scope, and budget, 2 out of 3, then it's a project. And it's okay, call it a project. Don't align it to an OKR. Don't hold the teams responsible for its success or failure, other than did it deliver on time and did it stay in budget, or was it the right scope? But you can't tell a team what to build and then expect them to be responsible for the outcomes and the goals. Right. But just call a spade a spade. Don't let it happen too often, but be realistic about it.
Totally agree with
that.
I
think one really tactical example from my experience was one of our teams had to respond to GDPR concerns several years ago. I think it's just, those things are unavoidable, with growing interest in user privacy controls and the fact that it's good for the customer anyway. It just so happened that there was a strict deadline. And so in that case, it was very much more about, we've got to be honest with ourselves. We have to go from kind of this mode where we're very focused on experimentation and hypothesis-driven work to, we just got to get this done.
Yeah. Now, like something like privacy by design and putting customers in control of their data, that might be a nice theme. But if you've got GDPR looming and you've got a deadline and you're just trying to be compliant, well, that's a project.
Definitely, yeah. It's always sometimes about time and project balancing, about things that you have to do because you have to do it, and at the same time you have these moments where you actually can explore problems, user feedbacks, and see what's popping out and what's popping on. there's also a question that we prepared, and I'm really looking for your answers about this one. Is from all of our perspective and you experience, and probably also mine. What could be the little steps or the main steps when you realize that? So you realize that maybe you have too much of a project management culture, to switch that and change it and going step by step into a project management culture.
Well, I think one of the things you can do when you spot that is just start to encourage teams to experiment a little bit more. Maybe introduce discovery, and make it abundantly clear that it is okay to fail. Actually, you don't want to fail once you've spent 6 months or however long building something and putting something out there. What you want is that failure to happen, or you to realize that something is not going to deliver as much value as you thought it was way earlier on in the process, before you've even built something, right? So you have some hypotheses. You don't need to do it across all the teams all at once. I do think that too much of a drastic change can wreak havoc. I like to think of it as find 1 or 2 teams, make them great examples of the new frameworks, of the new way of working, and everyone else will want to start working in the same way. I think that's kind of a good baby step.
I think along those lines, I had the really good fortune of working with a mentee just this past week. And they were saying that, Andrew, I've got the idea now. How do I go about getting the team running on it? And I said, well, before you dive into it, tell me a little bit more about this idea. Tell me a little bit more about the hypothesis. What's the differentiator? Why do you think that it's going to succeed in the market? And my mentee was working through some of those questions, but was struggling a little bit. And I said, listen, like, whether this is in a startup and you're looking for funding in order to get this thing off the ground, or if you're in a larger organization as part of like a group of product engineering teams, what you're really going to want to do is think of it as you can do something really cheaply very early on to learn whether or not this is going to work. You don't have to necessarily think of it as failing early, but think of it as learning whether or not you have a high probability of success later on, in a week, in a few days. Maybe that's a bit ambitious if you're not already spending the majority of your time talking to prospects, for example. Maybe you have the problem partially defined. Maybe the hypothesis is kind of there, but not quite. And so the question there is, you can do a bit more homework without getting all waterfall-y, of course, which is kind of another problem altogether. And instead really think through and test the logic of how might I find out more about whether or not this problem is valuable and whether the problem is viable.
Yeah, I totally agree on that, Andrew. And something I wanted to add about that is how you can progressively challenge decisions or orientation. And at first, it's difficult when you start a job or when you arrive in a company to challenge all the roadmap and say, okay, this is not how it works. So you have to deliver first, and after you start to. But starting to asking questions, and Chantal mentioned it about whys, about why does this add value to our business? Why does this add value to our user? Starting to ask this question during discussions, during stakeholder meetings, during designer reviews is actually helping the team progressively to think about why are we doing this instead of doing it. But it's a bit blurry at first, so it's a good example. And actually, I wanted to ask you a question about my perspective, because I mostly worked into small startups, let's say between few people to 30, 50, and I've only mostly been the first or the second product manager. So this has been a fight since the beginning of my career to fight between project and product management. And at first, what I wanted to focus on is discovery. So let's say that all the decisions that we made are based on some discovery. Let's say that some user interviews, some quantitative data, and I've been using this methods, and I don't know what you guys think about. It's to kind of show how the thing that we have done was not working the right way. Let's say that we deliver a feature and say we haven't been going through testing a prototype with users, and I can say if we have done this we could have avoided this situation. It's has not been working so well. So I don't know if what do you think about this method? How do you can help your stakeholder to realize that if you could have a little bit more of discovery or a little bit more about exposure to user, you could have learned more.
Yeah, so I think in this case, startups are a truly fascinating kind of situation to be in. I think that founding teams will usually have a really, really strong opinion about where they're going towards. And it's partly because they've had to do the VP of sales job. They've had to do the VP of product job, the VP of engineering job, and the VP of marketing job all in one. Like they've just had to like take all of that on. And so inevitably they're going to know more than we might realize coming into the situation. They're going to know a lot more about the prospects and the users and the market than we realize. And so I think that it's more about, in those cases, figuring out how to execute and also learning what they know, because they've got a synthesis of the problem at hand. They've got more information than most of the line employees that they're bringing in to just help delegate some of the simple things that they know that we've got to figure out how to scale. So yeah, I think it's about learning what to do with learning from that execution and then building your product nose from there.
I think that's a great point, Andrew. And that founding team, when you're at a startup, they are the high performing Scrum team that everybody strives to be, right? It truly is the high performer. Like they were focused. They had the cross-functional team. They didn't get distracted by other things. They had a clear vision and they came up with a strategy. And I think when you want to start to ramp up and you're scaling, you need to have some of that stuff documented, right? Like what is the strategy, and not just the company strategy? What's the product strategy, right? And what are the OKRs that align to that? And you really want to recreate that same founding team in every single squad or Scrum team or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's what you're trying to recreate.
Yeah, that's actually very true, and very it makes a lot of sense when you actually say it, because it recalls to things that happened to me in my career, and the fact that we have I don't know how to say it in English, I'm sorry, but we have this expression in French which is called le syndrome du héros for French speaker, which means basically that all the knowledge about product, about sales, about marketing is focused on only 1 or 2%. And you mentioned that the switch to go into this product management hero syndrome, thank you, Baptiste, is actually to share this knowledge. So making documentation, helping people to understand how does this part of the product work, how does this part of the product work, why does this important for the customer success team to know that, how does it happen in the flow. And it's actually, as soon as you realize that, actually in a fast-growing startup, what I can say is actually the better you can stop these steps to switch from a project to a product management culture and go on for that. So yeah, I totally agree on that. We have only 6 minutes left. We actually talked a lot about it. Let me just look. Anything you want to add about this topic, or just dive into questions?
There's a lot to add, but I think we can move on to the questions.
Okay, so we only have 3 questions, and I'll go with the first one, which is stated from Robin. And she's asking, creating a culture is hard to do for a single person. How do you involve others in making a broader change? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so if I could take this one for a moment, I definitely agree that creating a culture by oneself is is a lonely and hard journey. It's really about getting folks on the same page. And so if you feel, for example, let's say you're an individual contributor and you're trying to figure out, hey, this just feels like I'm cranking. I'm just constantly cranking quarter by quarter. I don't feel like we are really exploring several other hypotheses. I think that goes right back to what we were just discussing about getting a little bit more in tune with that high-performing Scrum team that is the founders. What do they know that you don't? Even before you start advocating for a broader change in terms of culture, it's about, are you on the same page about the problem or the job to be done at hand? And just making sure that you're truly on the same page there. Because once you can start to talk in the same language, then you can start to talk about, I'd like to experiment, or I have this hypothesis about this particular user problem, and I think it could have outsized results. You don't have to then feel like it's a fight. It's more like you're contributing the one or two or three things that might make sense to be prioritized during, say, the next prioritization session, to then say, okay, this makes more sense as like a big problem to be validated or to be solved for.
Yeah, I would just add, I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. It's really hard to be a lone soldier. I say that all the time. I think you have to have support of your leadership team, or at least one other person in the company. Otherwise, you might be just perceived as friction. And so in that respect, maybe you want to start to work on the leadership team by saying, or at least your head of product or whoever your manager is and your leader is, start by asking, can we have, 30% time to explore the unknown, right? And eventually you want that 30% to be the reverse. It's like 70% explore the unknown and 30%, the stuff that just drops in because it has to happen, or there's a bug, or there, whatever else there is, right? So start small and then try to flip it at some point. But you can't be a lone soldier. It will be a very difficult job.
Yeah, I wanted to add that you need to identify your allies very quickly, or at least, if I can summarize, because I don't want to say too much and we have some other questions coming on, but map out all the problems. So see the key, identify where are the problems going into the project management culture. Find your allies who you can rely on to progress that, and make your actually roadmap to get to this product management culture. It was a mistake. But yeah, that's wrap up a little bit what we said. We have another question coming from John, who's actually asking us, what are some KPIs to monitor to ensure that we are on the right path? What's your take on this one?
Well, we've started to play around with time to value. I can't tell you exactly how to calculate it yet because we're still working on it, but
totally agree.
You want to think about how quickly did we dismiss a possible solution? How much time did it take to actually get to delivering value? Were you able to figure out, an MVP and put something out there and tweak it? Time to value, but it is something worth looking at instead of some of your classic metrics.
Yeah, I think not to say that the classics aren't worthwhile to bear with, but I think if your KPIs are more focused on time for the initiative, whether or not you were on time or you were late by a certain amount of time, whether or not there was some amount of scope that had to be dropped. I mean, of course, those are telltale signs that you're actually operating in a project kind of environment as opposed to a product environment, where if you're instead measuring customer effort score or NPS, those are the types of levers and dials to pull and turn respectively that are going to be much more open-ended for product engineering teams to to be a bit more free on to figure out what hypotheses might make significant impact as opposed to executing on an idea, just getting it done.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think what you guys said, especially Chantal, is kind of the KPI to go to, this kind of North Star you wanna go. And if I can give a little tip about if you're actually in a project management culture and you're facing this struggle to get into project management, something you can do from the project management culture is actually ensure that your KPIs on your project are actually not that good. So if you realize that actually what you start to launch does not work, well, actually that's a good KPI to say maybe we're not launching the right thing, maybe we're not delivering value to our users, or maybe we can add some question. It's just a way for you to tweak the system you're inside in, and use the KPIs or the information you have to show the other face of the other side on the iceberg that you cannot see. And we have a final question that we can just wrap up because the time is done, but I think it's going to be helpful for everyone, and it's going to be really quick. Ashley is asking us, who are the key stakeholders to convince to avoid a project culture?
I mean, I think if you're starting within a product and tech, or it can be almost anyone can be your ally, but I would say it depends on how many levels you have as well, right? You really want your directors and VPs of product and engineering to be sort of the impetus, but I don't care. I'll take an ally in operations and sales, wherever they come from. You just need to be more than one. Yeah.
Yeah. Ditto.
I'll just add that, of course, you need to convince your C-levels and all the people that are actually going through management. But if you want to go on a maybe smaller level, identify who's a key stakeholder into your business. So, for example, if you work in a SaaS that actually the sales team is really involved to get into leads, maybe you can start to talk with them and ask them what are the problems. Do they have a failure rate really high? And for example, in another business, you can go to the customer success team if they have a really big impact on the business and start to actually question them about what works, what doesn't work. And actually, the first level that you can try to do that, and after that, you can share the knowledge, share that to everyone, and go to the direction and the management, which is the toughest one.
Yeah, and as long as you can get everybody else to not tell you feature requests and instead tell you what the problem is.
Yeah, exactly. If you've done that, you reach it, you can stamp it on your job title. I switched it to project management culture. Congratulations. Well, I guess that was a great way to end this session. Thank you very much, Chantal. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was really, really enlightening for me to speak with you today. So if you guys want to continue, we can just go and into the lounge session that's going to be right after that. Chantal, Andrew, and I will be still there to answer some more questions or continue the discussion. So feel free to join. And for all the others that are not coming, thank you very much for being with us tonight or this afternoon, this morning, and I hope to see you to the next 11th Summit.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.